So this morning we're talking about the coming of age of communities. Now, this is a topic that's really close to my heart because I suppose this is where really my journey with online learning really began in earnest. Although I've worked in learning for, well, crikey, far too long to even think about actually. um, Probably my pivotal role was working for Orange as head of communities globally. And what's really exciting for me is it feels like a lot of that stuff that maybe we felt like we were banging our heads against a brick wall back in the early 2000s is coming of age. And there are lots of reasons why that's the case, why their time is now. But I think that they are worthy of some very serious consideration in anybody's learning strategy and learning design. Really, just to give you, only in an hour, really all I can do is give you an overview of some of those key things you need to be thinking about. But there's a lot of material, and it's something that, particularly at Willow, we have a lot of expertise in. So if you do have any questions or you need any support with communities in any way, we'd be delighted to support you on that. It's very much sort of at the heart of everything we do. What I like to do though, before I dive into, well, this is why I'm passionate about communities, this is what I think communities are about, in the chat window, could you describe a community in your words, in a learning context? So if we're applying it to learning within an organisation, how would you describe a community? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and that gives me the opportunity to sip a bit more honey and lemon. That's lovely. Well, the definition that we used to use in workshops that we have run in the past were this one, and it is certainly not at odds at all with the things that you're saying. Bearing in mind that at this stage, and these are communities that we used to run back, sort of like say late 20th century, I suppose, early 2000s, a group of individuals acting around a clear shared purpose. Each participant brings value to the community, and the community brings value to each participant. So it's that cycle. It's just as you've all described. It's that shared purpose. Okay, so this was the definition that we brought to bear at this point, making it clear that it is around a shared purpose, and it's a shared purpose for those participants. That's very important, and I'll come back to why that's important later. But like I said, it's very much congruent and in line with what you were saying there. And even if your organisation hasn't really adopted communities in earnest, or maybe struggled communities in the past, then we know, in fact, that the reason why you're on this webinar at the moment is because you participate in a community, because you would have seen postings as part of your personal learning ecosystem that you've created for yourself, and take part in conversations and discussions with other people that have a shared common purpose like you. And one of the things I used to use in training back in the day, I mean, this is 2008, was saying, even if you don't feel that you're using it at the moment, even outside of work, you're probably using them in some way, shape or form to glean experience, context, advice from others that either are peers that are at the same point in their learning journey, maybe have a little bit of experience to share, or perhaps you're going to mentor others. So we've all got experience. These days, of course, it's part of living in a connected online world. But it really means that, I think, in terms of learning design within organisations, for communities, it really is their time. And with lots of things like this, just like beards coming back into fashion, it's often a case of timing. And just as hipsters benefited from single speed bikes and beards came back, so that communities came back. But I think it's that alignment of technology and learning strategy that has really helped that happen. I think one of the death knells for communities is if you decide, that this has always been thus, is if you decide that communities are your next big initiative, like lots of endeavours and organisations, because you can't do communities to people. It's got to be that shared common purpose, and that's emergent, and you may not know what that is, you may not be able to control it, but it will emerge over time. And they never left us. I mean, that's the thing, is that they've always been part of this. And in fact, back in the work that I used to do at Orange, we took part in a number of shared research programs with Reuters and other organisations, and Charles Jennings was at Reuters at the time. And we did a lot of work on the importance of communities, looking really at this area here about how you expose people to and transfer tacit knowledge, so that knowledge that's very difficult for us to contain and make explicit within anything from a book or a manual to a workshop. It's very difficult sometimes to capture that. So you need those connections, you need those communities. And actually what Charles Jennings has done essentially with 70-20-10 and the 70-20-10 Forum is really repackage something that's been around for a very long time. It's not to say that it's not valuable, and I think 70-20-10 has been a useful framework and mechanism to communicate learning strategy to others in the organisation, and why it isn't all about workshops, why it's not all about the catalogue. But communities are at the heart of this, and they are at the heart of social learning, but they're also at the heart of making this transformation from explicit to tacit. So we know the things that we need to be good at to do our job, but it's all in the execution. It's all about the context. You know, any of you that have been on my webinars before, I bleat on about context till the cows come home, but it is important. And that's that stuff that's tacit. It's those forms of knowledge. And really 70-20-10 has just helped to bring it into the mainstream, really. And this is a long quote, but the reason I want to bring it up is just take a second now to absorb this, and I'll let you have these slides, of course, at the end. This is Etienne Wenger, sometimes regarded as the father of communities of practice, and anybody that's worked in knowledge management is almost certain to have read his works. But when you read this, and it's interesting with a lot of debate about how useful are competency models, etc., at the moment. Wow, this really slaps you in the face, because it's talking about it constitutes competence in a given context. And I think that's so important, that you can be a doctor, a photographer, a project manager, an emergent leader, head of service management. You could be any of those things, but it's about the given context. What does that mean in our organisation? So, for example, for a doctor, somebody that working in the community is going to have a very different set of skills to somebody that's working maybe in an acute setting. Now, of course, their training will prepare them for that, but the context there, for an example, in an acute setting, that might be different depending on the demographic of the local community that you live in. All these things are context. And as he says here, your company may define your job as these are the targets, these are the goals, these are the competencies required to do it. But it's something that you determine day on day. It's those unwritten rules. We've all sort of had seminars and read things about the unwritten rules of the organisation. But that's it. We can try and categorise it. We can try and lock it down. But actually, it's about how we apply ourselves day to day to the things that we need to do. And this was back in 2000. And interesting, I found a nice article, actually. I've put the link to it because it's got some 5 key steps to social learning in an organisation. So I'm not poo-pooing this article in any way, shape or form. But what was interesting in the language that they used in this article in 2012, it was, we're beginning to see the beginnings of an online social movement. Well, I recognise quite a few of these names that were on the webinar this morning, and I bet you're all kind of giggling to yourselves thinking, the beginnings of an online social movement, 2012? I don't think so. A little bit catching up to do there by Forbes. But I think this is actually more to do about the fact that social learning and communities and informal learning, they're becoming easier to talk about. They're not as fringe. They're not seen as fluffy, as difficult to measure, as to not delivering value. They're actually seen now as a core part of a sensible and well thought out, intelligent strategy. It's just interesting to see people kind of jumping on it now, really. And where do communities fit? Well, obviously, one of the other things that we're talking about a lot at the moment are learning ecosystems. So where do communities fit in the learning ecosystem? Well, I did a webinar recently specifically on ecosystems, taking some work that the e-Learning Guild have been doing, some really nice work there. But if you look at the learning ecosystem and its components and what it's made up of, actually, you could highlight all of those areas as being touched and supported by communities. Of course, social networking collaboration is obvious, it's a given. But communities also create a home for experts to come and to support others, to help people through key transitions in their work lives, to make it easy to spread the knowledge of one expert to many. And of course, knowledge management is an obvious as well. But the reason why I highlighted talent management, and interestingly, I'm going to come back to the two that I didn't highlight, because you could argue that they have a place too. But with talent management, what you're enabling people to do is to again, have a space where they can demonstrate their skills, their competency, and their experience. You're uncovering the knowledge and the intellectual capital of your organisation. And that's really important with talent management. If we're looking for those people that are going to excel in our organisation, communities are a natural place where they can start to demonstrate and stretch their legs, as it were. So actually, I feel it's a very important part of that. But like I said, you could argue it touches all of them, because communities that I've helped build in terms of developing workshops and blended learning programs to develop the skills of facilitators, and not only community facilitators, but allow leaders and managers to have a more facilitative approach to their work. Actually, they become the custodians of structured learning, because they emerge the need, as it were. So the learning needs become emergent as you see the key things that communities are grappling with and the key things that they're discussing. And as such, they help set a really relevant agenda. So you know that the learning that you are offering is relevant and it's valid. Equally as well, going back to that picture that I showed you of me in the Runners World Forum, I think back in 2008, it was probably I've come up to my first ever half marathon. So it was a real last minute of, oh crikey, I haven't got to grips with using energy drinks. Can somebody help me? It was very much a performance support, last minute, reach out to the community. So you could argue I could have highlighted all of those where communities become a key part of facilitating a learning ecosystem. They're obviously not the only part, but they are an important part. And as that article in Forbes said, online social learning communities are changing the values of employer brands as well. And this goes back to the ecosystem point, actually. It's not just about the fact that, well, they're the obvious social learning solution. They actually make emergent how the organisation ticks, what's important to your people. So you may well, your internal communications team and your board may spend an awful long time grappling with what are the values of the organisations, what's our mission statement. But actually, if you were to dip into your organisation's communities, you'd find what the values of the employer are, because people are living them. And you can see whether they actually align. So like I say, from a strategic perspective, they are much more than you may think when you start to scratch under the surface, as it were, of communities. And there are also some key lessons, really, again, like I say, from knowledge management. This is where they were born. If another key topic that I'm asked to speak about a lot is personalised learning. And actually, communities are the ideal home for personalised learning because, as I said, the community sets the agenda. They lead the way. They're the spearhead. So what they enable you to do, communities of practice, lead the conversation, and they make those needs emergent. And I can dip into communities that really appeal to me. I could even start a community because I have a need that maybe I don't feel is being fulfilled elsewhere, and I want to start a community and I want to talk to other people about things that are really, really important. And as our organisations get flatter, look at that as well, as organisation design changes, so communities become more important. Now, like I said, this isn't new stuff. This is a slide that I used to use in workshops, back in 2000, where you're talking about, this is the new age of organisational design. Well, we're here. We're doing it now. But we can see where, as a person working in an organisation now, I am a multi-member. I'm a member of all sorts of different parts of that organisation, not just the team that I was recruited into, but I may act as a mentor to somebody else. I may be interested in developing a career over here. Hopefully, we've not got a siloed organisation, or at least we're trying to address that. And so we have this kind of multi-membership model. So they've become a natural part of organisational design. So we may well be doing it. We just might not call it communities. And I think that's the key with lots of things with learning. It's a bit like MOOCs. Cool, blimey, the knots that we tie ourselves in trying to decide and define exactly what a MOOC is, when actually a lot of us have probably been about applying the principles of design that a MOOC adopts for years. So don't get hung up on the other labels, but communities are probably already part of your design. It's very important, though, to understand how we can maximise those, and the fact that although they are emergent, that can sometimes mean they're a little bit neglected in terms of investment in them. So we can look at what that needs to look like, because you need to create the right environment and foster what community is going to provide for you. And it's about providing that choice architecture, really, the roles, the people, the purpose, the tools that will enable community to blossom. And that's what we're going to go on and talk about in a little while. And communities tackle the tough stuff. So new formal institute. This is an interesting list of a list of ways in which communities help tackle the tough stuff. I'm not going to tell you where this is from, because you're going to really laugh when you see where I've taken this from. Do a quick Google search. It certainly made me laugh when I realised where I'd found this reference from. But new formal institutions are not necessarily the best sites for social learning. Interdependence and shared goals make social learning easier. Forms of innovation and modes of learning cannot be separated. Flexibility in role distribution is an enabling factor. That means enabling in social learning, that people are not too pigeonholed. And diversity of learning sites in a community help it to adapt and survive. So it's flexible, it's future-proof, it's adapting to its environment. That was taken from a paper written about, I should go back one, developing ice fishing communities and getting permission to develop ice community fishing sites in Michigan. Now, that's probably the most obscure reference I have ever used. So you heard it here first, folks. History in the making. I've never referenced ice fishing before. What was interesting is that it was actually quite a sensitive piece of land and property negotiation they're going through. And rather than kind of drag out the contracts, drag out the negotiation tools, they formed a community. And most brave organisations, those that really care about what their customers think of their delivery, they reach out to the people that may have a problem, that may not be engaging, and they bring them in and make them part of the community. And I really like that communities can tackle those tough challenges. But yeah, I know nothing about ice fishing, so please don't ask me any more about that. But I wanted to give you guys a little challenge here. Obviously, they had a challenging situation where they were negotiating rights to fish in very inhospitable environments. But I'd like to bring it a little bit closer to home. Think about learning in a call centre. Now, call centres are often not necessarily misunderstood or glossed over, but perhaps they're not regarded with the importance that perhaps they should be. As a student, it's where I started my career, and funny enough, I had my first role in learning in a call centre. But it's where all of the chickens of an organisation come home to roost. It's where all of the things live and breathe with your customers. So learning is incredibly important in a call centre. So I want to ask you 2 questions. If you have been given the challenge to look at learning in a call centre, what you're going to provide for your people, what do you think makes an effective call centre, and what would the main learning needs be? And I'll give you a couple of minutes, and that gives me an opportunity to, I'll gargle silently. Yeah, that's great, Carl. So, time to answer is short. First time call resolution was drilled into us, that's for sure. Right outcome first time. Yeah, address client queries efficiently and effectively. Absolutely. That's a good one, Con. Yep, certainly first time call resolution is very important for those that, anybody that has actually got any experience in call centres. In the UK, we were all after the JD Power Award for best customer service, and first time call resolutions is key. Absolutely, knowledgeable response and empathy, for sure. And it's very, they're very fast moving organisations. the distribution of happy customers to customers that have an issue, it's a tough one. So to remain empathetic can be quite challenging. Absolutely. And Kai saying, yeah, correct call flow, exactly. Escalation, it's right. Oh my goodness, how much does it drive us all bonkers when we're passed from pillar to post? Absolutely. Understanding what the flow is, understanding how the call matures is really important. Main learning needs easy, simple, efficient access to required information. Absolutely. Yeah, knowledge systems are incredibly important in call centres. Yeah, absolutely. This is where performance support finds its home, doesn't it? About with the processes and technology to make sure that we've got access to that right information. Absolutely. Any more for any more? Another moment. That's lovely, everybody. Perfect. And when we start to dissect this, I'm going to show you a technique that we use in workshops with people looking at communities and developing community skills. Is a benefits tree. It's developed by David Skirm, again, another sort of KM superstar, as it were. And if you look at learning in a call centre, what are the things that you need to know? Well, just as you all highlighted, the enabling technology to support this is, of course, very, very important. But what you're looking at here is learning in a call centre. What do you need? You need to know the role. You need to know what the customers need to know. We need to, though, very, very rapidly reach potential. And we need to make sure that what we're doing is very close to customer need, it's aligned to their needs, that we are also as a virtuous circle, because we're learning about what the issues that our customers have with our products and services, so that can feed back into the future development of them, that we're more responsive, that customer satisfaction is improved. And it's all those things you were talking about. So improvement against whatever the targets will be, and that could be single contact resolution, it could be higher customer satisfaction scores, obviously demonstrated by better empathy, that we have improved processes, better access to knowledge, etc. Better morale. Call centres typically suffer from high staff turnover. Part of that is because often it is a stepping stone into another job. It's a first job, just as I and many of my friends had their part-time job while they were students at call centres. That's the nature of the game. But improving morale is really, really important, and it helps to reduce that issue of staff turnover, which is very expensive. But where communities really play a role is that things are changing so fast, from staff coming into the organisation and how many people that we have to train on a regular basis, through to the products and services that we promote, changing technologies. If we're talking about in this call centre, I'm thinking of the call centre that I used to support in my role at Orange in terms of communities. And of course, Orange now, EE, this is for mobile phones, very, very intensive call centre environment. But what you need to do is you need to be constantly learning. You need that virtuous loop. So things that people are learning from the customers need to go back into the way in which, like I said, we develop products and services, but the way in which people deal with calls going forward. So communities where people are able to mentor others into the role, where people can capture some of the things that they're learning as they learn, as they perform their job, can be fed back into that learning cycle. So it's where they're very, very important. So even fast-moving organisations that seem very performance support orientated, communities are really, really important. Often they're applied to kind of sort of bigger, more sort of innovation, esoteric subjects, but actually, call centres, they're absolutely vital to ensuring that this all stays up to date, and that your technology and the platforms that you're putting there in terms of the information that people have to hand, that is constantly up to date, that it is right, that it's contemporary, that it's changing with the times, and that it's validated. But communities aren't one thing. Just as I said there, actually, a community in a call centre could be very different from a community maybe trying to develop a breakthrough technology in a pharmaceutical, for example. They're not the same thing. So we don't want to be too didactic in what we consider communities to be. They need a flexible design. And they differ depending on the need, the culture, and the objectives of each discrete business area, because culture also has a part to play. The way in which people want to interact will also have a part to play, and it should then enable individuals to explore in a way that suits their needs. Now, again, I'm not one for saying, right, these are the community types, that's it, you've got your four, now off you go. I'm really using these as a way to help facilitate the conversations that you might want to have within your organisations or with your customers. But here's some useful community types that may help you in those conversations. Helping communities provide a forum to essentially help to solve those day-to-day problems. They can be quite transactional, quite performance support orientated. They may need very little supporting technology. They may need very little facilitation. They may exist purely as a place, as a living help centre, as it were. But something like a best practice community where we're trying to disseminate good practice and develop ways of working which we know are effective differ slightly, and they need more facilitation. Those sorts of things need to be drawn out, as it were. So a skilled facilitator is looking for those examples of good case studies of things that are working in parts of the organisation, those tacit things, and trying to make them explicit for the community. Knowledge stewarding communities are, again, there may well be areas where we know we have a huge amount of expertise, but we haven't really captured it in any way, and we need to in order to be able to share that around the organisation. That's something that is very common in organisations such as in the UK, places like the Ministry of Defence, in oil and gas, where you've got very specific sets of skills, and you may not have many people that have those sets of skills, but you want to disseminate it across a very dispersed environment. They become very important, and they need a lot of supporting technology and curation skills to make those happen. And then innovation communities need the space to breathe, to create breakthrough ideas and to find those new ways of working. And you can imagine that with each of these, they require different roles, a different explanation of their purpose, and different technologies to help them really flourish. And how can we decide what type of community that we ought to be fostering or supporting? Well, I'm going to go back to my good old friend, the value chain, because depending on the need that we're trying to address with a community, it helps us understand what the learning needs are here. So, for example, if we're talking about, in a sales environment or a marketing environment, increasing market share, then we may need a community that starts to perhaps give better access to market intelligence tools and people that are good at interpreting those statistics and turning them into something meaningful. It may be that we need a bit of that best practice community to look at, well, how can we better improve our delivery quality? It may be that we need somebody to be curating and capturing those case studies so that I can apply them and talk about those when I'm going into pitch for new work. It may be we need a bit of innovation here in terms of that better product fit. Do we need some breakthrough thinking there? So you can see where sometimes it's difficult to capture these in a very, very explicit learning need that, oh, that workshop would do with that, or that piece of e-learning would work. Actually, we probably have to be a bit more fluid. And it may well be the bringing together of many minds will help everybody learn. But let's not get too carried away here. As any of you know, I do suffer sometimes from eager puppy syndrome, where I get very enthusiastic about things. But I'm not naive, and I know that communities can face a number of barriers. And some of those are very interesting, difficult sometimes to crack, but I think it's going to get easier. But what I'd like to know before I tell you about some of the ways in which I think you can tackle barriers, what do you perceive as the barriers to community rollout in either organisations that you work in or organisations that you work with? What's stopping you? Absolutely, Con. Organisational culture. Tell me a bit more. What do you think it is about what attributes of a culture manifest to basically become barriers to a community. And Carl, time, ability to become an organisation due to service pressures. Absolutely, time is the one that it comes up in every single workshop we have ever run for organisations. So often we're asked to come in and to speak to a range of either learning and development professionals or perhaps heads of department or key managers in an organisation that want to start communities. But often it's, I can see this, it'd be great, but I haven't got the time. I love that, by the way. The benefit's not clear. We're going to come back to that, but you are spot on. And you're right about the could be seen as top down. Again, you want to avoid the initiative-itis of, now we're doing communities today. I talk about viral adoption in lots of different contexts, but I don't think it's any more important actually than in communities. So that's lovely. Yeah, buy-in from senior leaders. Again, you're absolutely right, Con. Hard to see the value. The value isn't obvious. And getting started, we have 40 countries internationally. Do you know what, Gwyn? It can seem like an insurmountable mountain to climb, which is where the viral adoption model is really important. One slide I didn't include in my deck today, but I often use is Willow's infamous onion diagram. And what the onion diagram talks about, essentially, Gwyn, is looking at the core of a community, what roles and what sort of heartbeat do you need to foster at the start to then be able to bring in those other countries. Often, and just as Mel said there, the culture of failed initiatives, we may think, right, on day one, we've got to bring everybody in, we've got to get everybody behind this. And that's just not fair. It's not fair on you. It's not fair on the participants. It is something that will evolve over time. The problem with that, though, is it comes back to the points that Con and Carl were making, is it's hard then to see the value. If this is going to take forever, then it's difficult to see the value. With intensive facilitation, it doesn't see the value. It doesn't hide the value, and it doesn't take long to see that value if you know how to measure it. So there's some great stuff there, and things that can all be tackled with the right approach. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy, but with the right framework, there's a lot you can do and a lot of steps you can take to help mitigate some of those. It's quite a nice book, actually, back in 2010, The New Social Learning. I don't know if any of you have read it, but there's some good stuff there to help you build your case internally, actually. But of course, one of the things that they talk about, one of the largest roadblocks to getting started, are those who don't think it's a good idea. And again, Mel, you're absolutely right. It may be that it's, we've been here, done that, seen it too many times. Didn't work the first time. It's often about control as well. And that is because community wrestles control of learning and democratizes it. It makes it more fluid, but that means it can feel very difficult to get a hold of. It can feel a bit ephemeral. What's actually happening here? So control's often the issue. And it's also about so often a lack of understanding of what L&D really bring to an organisation. And it's giving L&D the space and the breathing room to be what they can really be as facilitators of learning and facilitators of the business strategy through learning, not the gatekeepers of a catalogue. And that's often due to the fact that L&D are under pressure all the time to demonstrate, measure, evaluate, ROI, all those things. Now, I'm not saying that those things aren't important. Of course they are. But the problem is that they can essentially suffocate learning and innovation, because we want that to be easy. And measurement in communities ain't easy. It's possible, but it's not as easy as other interventions. You can start with, there are early measures of community health, those hygiene factors in terms of the number of people that are visiting, number of posts, etc. But they paint a very, very shallow story. It's some deeper, more substantive stuff we're trying to get at here. But if they're that good, again, what's the delay? We talked about, this is why they work so well in all sorts of different contexts, but still, they're not quite getting through. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that you need to see them as key to the strategic evolution of an organisation. So Charles, very recently, actually, in 2015, was talking about the journey for L&D transformation. And it's about that maturity model of L&D. So it's the firstly centralising standards and processing, building a consistent performance coaching approach, then strengthening governance, and finally federalising to provide the autonomy needed for agility, responsiveness, and sustainability. A lovely quote, and I think Charles is absolutely fantastic. What does it mean in practice? What it really means is if you look at an organisation as a whole, you've got the board, and they are essentially influencing strategy and the strategic skills that we need to deliver the things that we need to be successful as an organisation. But those strategic skills need to be validated through subject matter experts and through people on the front line. Just to go back to that call centre, you can set the strategic skills of, we need to be number one in customer service because we know that increases our repeat business, makes us more profitable, etc., etc. So to do that, we believe these are the skills that you need. Well, are they? Or you might have the skills right, but the discrete application might be different to what we expect. So that's where you get the validation through people actually doing the work. And knowledge becomes emergent and problems are solved. And that's where we see learning and knowledge in action. And that's what communities can deliver, this validation of the strategy and of the skills that we think we need. It fosters professional collaboration and information and access to expertise. And if we look at, so I highlighted there really the area where communities really hit. And apologies for the fuzziness of this. I was trying to find the original image, but I struggled to find it. But this is a model that we built a little while ago, actually. We've got it copyrighted for this year, but this is something that we developed many years ago, actually, about building a learning organisation. And it's moving from individual learning and tactical organisations through to this kind of knowledge flow and learning and innovation. And again, it's not to say that any of these are wrong. You probably have a combination of all of these things, and that's no problem. But what we're trying to do is that we may have a catalogue as a framework, as a benchmark, that the 10 part almost of the 70-20-10. It's not that it's not needed, but then it's about, well, how does that work in practice? Are we being efficient in the way that we're bringing those skills to bear? Are they effective? We start to bring in the blend. And then we're looking at how organisations, how learning really happens in that whole virtuous circle. And communities are the way in which we can do that. Learning becomes focused on creating the right environment to foster learning, such as communities, as opposed to just delivering the catalogue. So communities become absolutely strategically valid and very, very important. But to make them work, they have an impact on the skills that we may well regard as important in learning, and not just in learning, I think also in the practice of management and leadership and the way that they go about their roles. There's a very big crossover in the Venn diagram of communities and virtual team leadership, another area that we do a lot of work in, that a lot of those skills are very, very similar. And you need to make sure that you have the right environment. I think the problem with communities is because they can emerge and they may be happening despite what L&D think or despite what the board think, they may well be happening. Often it's seen as, oh, well, they'll just take care of themselves. But actually, you'll get a lot more bang for your buck and a lot more delivery on that strategy if you have the right supporting environment, both from a skills perspective and a technology perspective, to foster it and help it happen. And just some of the roles you're going to need to consider are the roles, of course, of a facilitator, of subject matter experts that can be invited into the community and really kind of jumpstart it. Champions that are helping advocate the importance of communities and perhaps bringing in new members. That you've got people that are motivated, that want to be a part of it, and that's about being clear on your purpose. But just as you guys all mentioned, supportive managers, and that's where you have to go back to the how do we do what we do. It's where I think value chain is really useful, actually, because I think it hits at the heart of managers are being asked to deliver things in an organisation. That's what they're targeted to do. And this will help them see it as part of that flow to delivery. And also curators that are helping ensure that what the community is offering and the things that they're capturing can be spread for the greater good for those that are outside the community as well, because they may well very much permeate the edges of the community. But you need to make an irresistible case for them, because they can still be seen as a little bit soft, a little bit difficult to define. So how do we make that irresistible case for them? Well, you have to answer the questions for the participants and either owners or sponsors. And when we say owners, maybe people that are going to help support the blossoming of the community, or those managers that are going to enable people to be part of this. What's in it for them? So for participants, why should I be a part of this community? How does it align to me? How is it important to me? It's those personalisation questions, actually. And what's the big picture? Is it useful for me to be part of this community? Is it going to help me advance? Hopefully you'll have enough people in the organisation, actually, just through the way in which they approach the world, that actually they genuinely want to give back. It's something that they get a lot of pleasure from. But different people have different motivations, and communities still play a part in environments that could be seen as very competitive, such as sales environments. Actually, communities with the right purpose and the right type of content and helping me to pitch when I need to pitch, they can still also be very important. But for the owners and the sponsors, it is about those things that you all mentioned. Benefit. Why should I allocate the time? Why should I endorse it? Why should I allow others the time? Time. We're too busy. And those purpose statements are something that we spend a lot of time in workshops on, because if you get them right, the time issue melts away. In fact, I'm going to go back for a moment, just pause on that for a moment, because time came up in yours there. If we think back to the story that I gave of the call centre, or look at that value chain, what communities are enabling us to do is to get better, faster. Faster than a workshop would be able to do, faster than a formal learning intervention would be able to do. Now, formal learning interventions will give us the scaffold and the framework by which people can excel. I think there's a bit of an overreaction to say, well, they're not important anymore. They absolutely are. There is something about the way of working, the way we do things around here, and give people the context so that they can then understand what's going on and how a community is helping me. But time is often seen as the barrier, whereas a well invested in and facilitated community should help speed up time to competency, time to excellence, time to innovation. But you have to measure those. So you have to choose some communities where you can go in and do some really in-depth benefits analysis. Many years ago, and again, if it's something that people are interested in, I can share it with you. Again, at my time at Orange, we were doing a lot of measurement around the fraud and revenue assurance community there. Now, fraud and revenue assurance is a very specialist part of an organisation like an international telco. And in fact, the team that were there were asked to consult with the European Commission on preventing fraud. So you've got quite a lot of boffins in there, but actually, where does fraud and revenue assurance really hit? It hits in the shops and it hits in the call centres. That's where it's happening. Or it may well hit in the contract negotiations for building new mobile sites, all these sorts of things. So actually, having a community where people can be raising these issues, talking about them, how do I deal with them, getting access to mentors, understanding what the latest fraud incidences or attempts on fraud may be, skills in which you can assure revenue, looking at loopholes, looking at things that you can do. We worked very intensively to look at measuring the benefits of the community and the issues that they were raising, the speed to resolve them, and the way they were being disseminated around an organisation, Gwyn, just as you've described, 40 countries plus, lots and lots of different countries. And they attributed, over a 3-year period, no kidding, €100 million saving in fraud and revenue assurance by adopting a community approach, because it didn't rely on a very limited number of people trying to get around 40 countries, essentially training people who then disseminated it. They were able to adopt early technology, back in early 2000s, early technology, but to make that happen. So the time issue becomes an entire irrelevance. It's the way that they did their job. It became part of how fraud and revenue assurance happened in that organisation. So what do you need to make something like that happen? What did they have? What do they need? Well, you need to define the type. So you need to think about, what is our purpose, and go back to that value chain. What are the things that we're trying to address? You need to make sure you've got the right roles in place. You've got good facilitation. You've got a core of engaged people that they can then start to act as your champions to draw others in. Don't underestimate the importance of lurkers, though, as they're called, those people that may not become visible in a community but are active around the periphery. Often, you'll never know who they are until you decide to close down a community. Then you suddenly get a rush of people going, oh my goodness, that was so useful. You've never heard of them, never spoken to them before, but they were gleaning a lot of value from the community. It needs a clear purpose. You need to map what the benefits will be in the early stages and also longer term. So in the early stages of benefits, again, something that we go into a lot of depth when we're working with our clients, they're about community health, those hygiene factors, but then looking at the benefits longer term, basically mapping them to the key objectives, the key performance indicators really of an organisation or a department or a team. You need a plan to manage it because it changes over time. You need to understand how you're going to measure it, how you're going to plan for evolution, and making sure you've got the right supporting technology. But the one thing I'll say at this point, it ain't expensive, and you've probably got most of what you need already. So often what happens is we then go off on one on ESNs, on enterprise social networks. Think, right, then we need our own Facebook. Nah, well, you might not. You've probably got a lot of what you need already. That's not to say that you may well benefit from some additional technology, and quite often we do a technology audit. But the idea is to maximise what you've got already, because again, what you don't want, just as Mel has said there, a culture of failed initiatives. Last thing you want to do is slap a brand new piece of shiny technology on it and say, oh look, there are your communities. That's not how it works. But of course, you've got to have the right supporting technology so that it gets to the people in the right place in a format that suits them. So, are these sorts of people that would like to be participating in discussions on their mobile phone on the way into work? Or if we go back to call centres, is this performance support? They need this knowledge at their fingertips. It's going to be different depending on the environment. So a lot of the work that we do in Willow is essentially around building the essential skill set, because you could argue that, well, communities, that's a very specific skill, isn't it? Well, I don't think it is, because I think the skills of bringing people together around a shared purpose to improve delivery, innovation, and quality, actually, that relates really to anybody that leads a group of people in an organisation, and they can adopt a community approach. But then you may well have more formalised communities that spread outside teams, of course, where you have dispersed organisations, where you have, for example, a few years ago, I did some work with Unilever on supporting their product managers. So, one of Unilever's products is something well known like Dove, let's say, for example, where you've got product managers across all sorts of territories. And each of them have a discreetly different challenge in terms of managing that product in the market. But a community approach is a great way to understand their context. So rather than central office saying, right, we've got this new product, this is how you're rolling it out, this is the marketing plan, etc., of course, that's going to be entirely different depending on the demographic, the market maturity, market saturation, all those sorts of things. So communities are a great way to contextualize that. So they adopted actually the global product managers essentially became facilitators. So that's quite an interesting way of looking at that challenge. So we do a lot of workshops and blended programs that end up meshing with leadership development programs on really the skills of communities, as well as, of course, those very specifically wanting to look at developing communities in an organisation. And the evaluation and management support measurement support, I should say, is always worth a bit of investment just to start off with, to get you going in terms of how you measure that. And sometimes, obviously, a technology review to make sure the technology you've got is fit for purpose. So, like I said, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of communities, because each of those sections, for example, for the intensive workshops we run, can often last 3 days and be supported by an entire sort of blended curriculum to help continue that learning. There's a lot to be said, but hopefully it's given you a bit of context in terms of why it's safe to talk about communities again, and why they're very important, and why they really sit at the heart of a lot of the conversations that we're having in L&D at the moment. So as we're entering into our last 5 minutes, There aren't many of us on the call, so do you know what? If you want to unmute, fire away with some questions, because it'd be lovely to hear your voices, because I think mine's just about to give out. Don't be shy. Please ask some questions. Here to help, and I've got some more bits and pieces I can share with you afterwards if you wish.
Hello, Lisa.
Hi, hello.
It's Con.
Oh, hi, Con. Oh, how lovely to speak to you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. The
Good.
question I had was, we've seen a lot of reports recently about the skills of LD practitioners and how they really need to improve in a lot of areas. Do you see the skills pertaining to setting up of communities, learning communities, as one area where LD practitioners need to really improve on? I'm sensing that it's a growing area, and it's one area that's going to really hit the mark, like you said, but I just don't think, looking across the board, that we as a profession maybe have the skills, the attributes, the characteristics to undertake this as a community. So what do you think?
I quite often reflect on why, when I graduated and went on the graduate milk round, why was I drawn to roles in learning and development? And I was drawn to them because at that point, as a young girl many years ago, I wanted to help other people. This is going to sound like a Miss World speech now, but be the best that they can be. But I really thought that's what learning was about, and it's why people go into teaching. I want to enable people to make the most of their talents and skills in an organisation or outside an organisation, and to reach their potential. And I'm sure that a lot of people go into learning and development feeling the same way. The challenge, though, then, is when you get drawn into an organisation where you're you're kind of shoehorned then into the, as I said, the custodians of the catalogue of those that have to. But here's your workshops, or here are our learning needs. Go off and deliver them, and we can often lose sight of what L&D are all about. So, although I think you're right, Con, in terms of it's not explicit there on the job description, let's say. I would hope that people that are drawn towards learning would want to do that. That's how they would feel. So I don't think it's incongruent with what learning development have the potential to be. But you're right, it does need to start to get onto the strategic skills agenda. And dare I say it, if anybody's reviewing their competency models, they probably ought to be looking at this. And like I said, I think it goes outside learning and development. It probably goes into the way in which we lead and manage. But I think there is a bit of a deficit, and that's why we get called into a lot of organisations to do this, because I'm not sure people quite understand what that blend of skills and responsibilities actually is. So you're right, Con. I think it's right for the picking, though. I think the stars are in alignment for this one, because a lot of the periphery conversation that's happening with the changing role of L&D.
Thank you.
Lovely. And Mel, did you have any questions before we go? And Gwyn and Carl just said, unfortunately, they had to pop up rather briefly. They just sent me a private message, but they're going to forward some questions to me later. But Mel, did you have any questions before we go?
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Con. I think I was interested because we're not a sort of corporate enterprise. We're a charity that works with academic communities. Whether you've got experience of communities within sort of learning communities within an academic setting, and whether there are any different or unique challenges in those, or what experience you'd had, or any sort of thoughts.
Well, often within an academic institution, because by virtue of them being co-located, they essentially emerge naturally as people develop groups where they meet and discuss and talk about subjects that are inherently of interest to them, because they're that type of organisation, they're that type of environment, I suppose. They have that type of culture. But I don't think in terms of making sure that they are fostered and taken care of and somebody cares about them, I don't think that they're any less right for a bit of investment, actually, because when you look at particularly with the emergence of things like MOOCs, you have communities that blossom by virtue of people studying together over a dispersed environment, and often they live long beyond the experience that they've had together. So in some ways, you would hope that it would be easier, but often it's the common purpose, because people sort of go very clear about what they want to achieve and what they're trying to do. It's actually trying to find people with that shared common purpose. But in lots of ways, I would say that the emergence of the virtual campus and distance learning would mean that academics should really, in some ways, have sort of been leading the way. It's funny when you talk about things like Open University. Really, they've been doing MOOCs forever and a day, and learning communities kind of emerge around the tutor and their group of people that they've always supported. They quite often come together as their own forming action learning sets. But I don't think the roles and the purpose and giving the space and time are any less of a challenge in an academic organisation. So sometimes a little bit of work in terms of helping them understand the value and the fact that research programmes and delivery can be often a lot quicker when it's delivered through communities. It pays to give them a little bit of attention. It just tends to be that people can naturally draw themselves to it, so sometimes you can kind of take them for granted, I think, in academic organisations.
Yeah, that's great. I think especially because ours is more that sort of virtual distributed sort of community situation. So that's great.
I think just providing a bit of signposting in some ways, actually, knowing that they exist, there's a place that I can go to, is very, very useful. Lovely. That's great. Well, thank you ever so much for coming along this morning. So I'm going to distribute the recording of this webinar as well. So anybody that you think that might find this of interest, please let me know. Of course, if you've got anybody that actually needs any support with communities and the sort of entire skill set and the way in which you foster them, that's what we're here to do. I've also got the list of references on the slides. I'll distribute it to you guys afterwards. And thanks ever so much for coming on this morning. Hopefully speak to you again soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.